This week on Information Technology Leaders, Eric Engstrom, founder and CEO of Wildseed Limited. Now here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest is the founder and CEO of Wildseed Limited. When I look over his life and career, the word that comes to mind is alternative. He approached high school and college differently from other students and never really graduated from either. When he started his time at Microsoft, he began as an evangelist rather than a traditional developer. And when he was invited to testify on Microsoft's behalf at the antitrust trial, he opted for a forthright approach to questions asked, in sharp contrast to others from Microsoft who testified. In fact, according to most accounts, it was a shame that Microsoft didn't call a dozen just like him to the stand. In life after Microsoft, rather than retiring, he began a company in India that provides high-quality, offshore, outsourced software development, and he founded Wildseed, a company that pioneered the world's first SmartSkin intelligent accessories for wireless phones. Clearly, there's something to be said for following the road less traveled. Please welcome Eric Engstrom.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Where did you grow up?
A little town in eastern Washington called Orrville.
And what was that like?
Slow.
Slow?
It was very slow there.
Did you feel it was slow at the time?
Yes, actually. Yeah. From the time I was very small. It was always slow, and there was always wanting to get out.
When you were in elementary school, were you working at grade level?
No, I usually did in math and sciences the years ahead. Mm-hmm. And then the next year I would get to start over again. And so I have a very good grounding in basic arithmetic since I've done it many times in my life.
How did your interest in space travel begin?
Always interested since the time I can remember, mostly from watching Star Trek. Mm-hmm. And then when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, I was 4. Mm-hmm. And that was, how should we say, a seminal event in my life. Mm-hmm. I watched the first moon landing wearing homemade moon shoes and an astronaut suit that you got for Halloween. And a Lost in Space, that was a Lost in Space space helmet. All of which I still have, of course, because things like that move you.
Yes, they do. And when you were about 8, you heard somebody from NASA speak. What impact did that have on you?
Oh, that was an interesting engagement. This guy comes to the gymnasium at Orrville. How on earth they ever sent somebody who could talk at all to the wilds of what I think of as the Northwest Territories? I don't know. But anyway, he came there, and his the only point I remember from his speech, besides miniaturization, everything gets smaller and they'll be making planes out of plastic, was that this one individual who was the chief designer on Skylab had got his PhD in mathematics by the time he was 20. Mm. And so I decided that seemed like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. So I decided I would accelerate my education, get out of school early, and collect all these degrees that would help me somehow in life.
At age 8, you made this decision.
Of course, the irony of it is that I did get out of high school early, but not exactly the way most people would think of as a success. And I went to college early and didn't finish. And it was a long stream of, well, that was such a good idea after all. Mm-hmm. So.
How did your interest in computers come about, and when did you build your first one?
So I'm 10 years old. I've decided I'm going to go to Mars, right? First person to Mars. Mm-hmm. And in that time period, somehow I thought I should stop dreaming and actually do something about it because, dreamers never got anywhere. That's right. So I forget the intermediate step, but at some point I decided the first thing that I could actually act on was building a computer to control my spaceship. Mm-hmm. And that's how I bought the first computer, put it together with a plumber's soldering iron. It actually took me about a year to get it running. Really?
And you were how old?
I was 11 the first time it did anything. It was not much of a computer by today's standards. Mm-hmm. The major point of interest there, I guess, is you could hook it up to a television screen and make a static picture of the Starship Enterprise like you could draw on graph paper today by filling in the graphs. It had the resolution less sophisticated than your digital watch.
Were your parents worried about you?
No. My father was only confused as to why I cared so much about this static picture on the television screen rather than any number of other activities one could do in Orrville, fishing, hunting, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
Tell us about working in your dad's store. Did you like dealing with the public?
I have spent a lot of time in my life dealing with the public. I have, frankly, liked very little of it. People are unpredictable to me, so it is always very, very hit and miss whether I can find a way to communicate them in a way they find satisfactory. The store was relatively contained experience for dealing with them. Mm-hmm. So
And what kind of store was it?
I was started out as a variety store. We sold very much like they do in all grocery stores today. This is back before grocery stores carried anything but groceries. And then when I was 6, we renovated the store and turned it into a Western store. And so I spent my time selling cowboy boots and saddles and tack to people who farmed for a living. Slightly different than I wanted to do as I got older.
I can imagine. And did you go to a traditional high school?
No, as one of the great ironies of existence as well, I went to a private Christian high school, graduating class of 3, unaccredited, and literally with it also had no indoor plumbing, so to speak. So it was
Long days.
It was a long day. Yes, they actually had an incinerating toilet, so it's not fair to say there was nothing indoor, but nothing indoor in the sense that you would think of it. And the whole point of that was to accelerate my educational process and get out of Orville and onto bigger and better things.
And one of those bigger and better things was you started writing software at about 16. How did that come about?
So I found a guy in Omak, which is very close to where I was going to school, that needed some software written. And I naively thought if I went and told him I could write software, he would believe me. So I did, and then he did. And even though I had never written a program that actually worked in my life, of any magnitude, right? I mean, I had my little computer with the very small programs on it, but he hired me. 2 weeks later, he came by, and I think his words were, I know that you don't know. To which my response, I believe, was, am I fired? And he said, no, you're doing quite well. I just wanted you to know you had not...
Right, that I know.
You had not you had not successfully pulled the wool over my eyes. So anyway, that was, I worked for him for 3 years, and then started working for myself after that.
Did you attend college?
I took 3 classes. I went to WSU for 4 years. I highly recommend it as a social experience. So I'm probably not the ideal poster boy for higher education.
4 years and you took 3 classes?
All at the first, too.
Yeah.
I got them right out of the way right up front, so there was lots of time for drinking.
So that's pretty much it for your academic experience.
That's it. Yes. I was a returning student for 4 years, though, which I got to say, if you're between 18 and 22 and need a status and you're not going to college, returning student works very well.
That's the one to do.
Yes.
So by age 21, you're still working for Joe, and you'd said that you realized that it was kind of a job but not really a career. So what did you do?
Yes, it was a job, not an adventure. Not wanting to join the Army, I quit working for him and tried to finish a bunch of projects on my own. I made a miserable living doing that, but nonetheless paid the bills. And then that was what I did between 21 and 23. When I finally decided to, a friend of mine actually called me from Seattle, said you should really interview for this job at Microsoft. You're stubbornly wasting your time over there, and you can get this job. That's how I ended up in his garage.
And what did you wear to your Microsoft interview?
Oh, I dressed the way any country bumpkin would dress. Brand new plaid shirt and Levi jeans, both pressed and starched as best as I could make them, with, of course, brilliantly white tennis shoes, because that was the sign of somebody who was really in style. And short sleeve, of course, too. I've recently learned that short sleeve shirts are not a fashion statement.
Was this interview as intense as an interview would have been for a full-time job?
The interview for the contracting job, no, not at all. It was literally, at the time, Microsoft needed somebody for 30 days to answer a glut of email they'd gotten. So they were interested in the fact that I knew how to write in a particular programming language called C. It turns out that the way C programmers deal with their computer, they would call in, and the way that Fortran programmers would deal with their computer, since they're used to dealing with the problems, it's the same way they deal with their computer. They would type it up in a letter or type it in a punch card and send it in. So I was hired because I knew C, and what I got a stack of was 300 Fortran programmers complaining. So I dug through those, learned Fortran in the process. Not that that's ever been of any use at all. And
got you through your 1 month contract.
It got me through my one month contract, and then they offered me a job at the end of that, which I unfortunately turned down.
Declined, yeah.
Yes.
So you did get this call from Data.io. How did that interview go?
So the Data.io interview was much more like a normal company interview. They each one brought themselves in and set me. I actually stayed in one room, which is unusual at Microsoft style interviews. They trot you around to keep you disoriented.
Tire you out.
Yeah, in Data.io's interview style, they turn the lights on you, leave you in the room, and the different interrogators come in. However, they don't really have the same interview style. So the only question I was asked that was actually interesting was, could you possibly describe this one database structure, because many self-taught people don't know the proper names of things, and it makes it difficult for them to communicate. Turns out I got lucky. Mr. Boyce picked the only data structure I knew the name of that was in common use. So that was, at that point, he thought, obviously your training has been perfect.
Right.
You may move on. So never invoke skill when luck will do.
Yeah. So this was your second interview that you handled that way, pretty much.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah,
and it was only it wasn't until sometime later in my career I got a job without forging the resume. So.
Well, you were offered both jobs. You were offered the Data I/O job and the Microsoft job. Why did you take the Data I/O job?
They offered me $2,000 more a year, and of course, Microsoft was going to make that up with 2,000 stock options in 1986 or something like that. But I decided stock options were, I think my quote at the time was, something they do to people in plaid shirts to confuse them about cash.
Yeah, that must be it.
That was a lot of money. That was the first time I lost $10 million in my life. So, and unfortunately not the last, but whatever.
What were your responsibilities at Data I/O?
I was the lead programmer on a project to test programmable logic devices. So the idea there is programmable logic device is actually a little electronic circuit that you can load a program into that makes the wiring happen. So it doesn't run like a computer you'd expect, but it makes a programmable circuit one time. The problem with that is little explosions inside. So you need a program to test to make sure the explosions don't short out the wires. They call these shorts stuck at 1 or stuck at 0. The point of this, of course, I know so little about this when I arrive. The stuck at 1 is the only part of the joke. My boss keeps explaining to me, we're testing for stuck at 1 or stuck at 0, and I keep telling him, since I'm a software person, don't worry, I'm very good at this. The program will never get stuck. That was 2 days before I realized that
what he was saying.
That if I say that one more time, I'm likely to get fired. Right? Perhaps I should go read about whatever this PLD thing is. So,
did this feel more like a career than a job?
Most definitely. So I immediately made friends with a man named Walter Bright there, who was moonlighting on a compiler project, and went to work doing stuff for him too. So.
And how did this eventually lead you back to Microsoft?
Left Data I/O after 2 years to work for Walter in a company called Zortec full time. And about 18 months after that, it got bought. In the process of that, I could stay working there, but their various and sundry reporting structures made it impossible for anything interesting to happen. So I resigned after the acquisition was done, so there'd be no problem putting anything to bed there. And at that time, Microsoft had sent to my girlfriend at the time a message saying, hey, would Eric be offended if we tried to recruit him? And I just said, no, I don't think so. I think that'll be a fine thing. And the thing that was exciting about that job, of course, is it wasn't development. It was using my personality to make a living. Wow, what a concept. So.
Did this interview go differently than prior interviews, either for Microsoft or for other companies?
Oh, yes. This interview was the format was more traditional Microsoft. You'll go meet 5 or 6 people. They will grill you indefinitely. However, the grilling was very, very vague. One gentleman, Alistair Banks, sat in his chair the entire time of the interview. For an hour, this man told me his job while he cleaned his toes. When he'd completed his speech on what he did for a living, his only question to me was, do you think you could do that? I said, yes. He goes, great, I'll hire you. I didn't know if the job was for patience or tedium or comfort around people cleaning their toes. The other questions were like, what do you think of the Microsoft Apple lawsuit, things like that. Very, very vague questions. And when I took the job, I found that the job description was very, very vague as well.
Yeah, for a reason.
Yes. Yeah. My boss told me, your job is to be an evangelist. I said, okay, and what am I supposed to do? Evangelize. Okay. I said, that's self-referential. And he goes, yeah. So get over it. Move on.
Did you want the job or not?
Yeah, and it was actually turned out to be one of the best jobs I ever had.
You had some training that was part of a trip to Rosario's. Tell us about that.
So they put us on a plane. This is actually the day before I started because, again, in pursuing the absolute possible stupidest path I could do with stock options, I decided I always wanted my start date to be something I could remember. So October 1st was my start date. The lowest price period, the strike price for stock during that month was the last day of September. Right. So again, costing myself $45,000, $50,000 by my stubbornness on not starting the day that I actually worked.
Could remember. Yeah.
Yeah, because I wanted a day to remember. So, my memory hasn't been worth that much yet. In any case, flew up there. Yes, but the memory of that event I doubt will ever help me that much. Anyway, flew up there. It's a very interesting format. This is my first day on the job. They're doing one of those traditional group building exercises. We'll all get in a room, we'll choose sides, we'll play this game. The game was to show how cooperation in the end would allow everyone to have enough resources to succeed brilliantly. the problem is that no one at Microsoft believes in cooperation, and I've never been around people who are so aggressively vocal about that.
Who didn't try to hide it.
Yes, I've always thought that was a trait to be concealed from people.
Right.
And literally at one point, the senior man at the organization is screaming at the instructor, "There's only a limited number of everything. Do you understand? This fanciful world you've created is absurd." And the guy said, "Well, that's not the point of my lecture." And he goes, "Well, then you're dismissed. You can leave." And that was the first training course I was to. That's very typical of Microsoft training courses, actually.
And I believe your response to that was, "I might like it here."
Yes.
Yeah, you felt very comfortable
Yes.
in that kind of environment. Did you feel comfortable among this group of people as you started to get to know them?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I'd actually been, at the time, one of the evangelism hobbies of the evangelist team was going shooting at pistol ranges. So that was an Orville person,
Yeah,
of course,
I'm
has guns and knows how to use them. In fact, one of the most embarrassing experiences I had at Date.io, not knowing that people didn't carry guns in the city. From Orville, you understand, they run drugs across the border. So one violent experience, one violent death at the time I left, a year. Being an engineer, I did the math and thought, my God, they must be dying like flies in Seattle. So first thing I packed was my pistol. I come over here and I'm talking to a bunch of people in the office building, you understand. I say, some guy talking about guns and going shooting. I think I've never seen a gun. Oh, here, let me show you. So I open the pack, hand him the gun. All of a sudden I look around and you can't see anybody. It's all cubicles, right? And finally my colleague, I hear him, "You're not going to shoot anybody, are you?" And I go, "Mike, what? What are you talking about? It's empty." So that was like one of my 3-week introductions to Seattle. Wow, they don't shoot people here. I like it here much better.
Yeah.
So that was, so anyway, we would go to the shooting range. And so I knew most of these people already. So
They don't shoot people, but they do argue a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a great outlet for frustration.
Were you comfortable with the Microsoft culture of conflict?
Exceedingly so.
Yes.
Yeah. That was unlearning a lot of rules in the past that had constrained me. In fact, my entire career at Microsoft was learning that, how to argue better so that it was not. I mean, most people avoid arguments because they don't like confrontation. The trick at Microsoft was really to learn how to argue to make your point the least number of words possible, and leaving the other person no out. Right. Microsoft is a debate society where winning is worth millions.
Right.
Yeah. So
it was kind of like finding home.
Yes, in many ways. It was much better than the retail store,
Yes.
where the customer was always right.
Yeah.
So
Wasn't working for you. So you spent about 2 years as an evangelist. What are you most proud of from that time?
Well, evangelism successes are an unusual thing to be proud of. I think I'm probably most proud of what happened with Whatcom and the fact that Craig ended up taking my job, because Craig Eisler has ended up being an awesome contributor at Microsoft and an awesome friend of mine as a result. Probably from a corporate standpoint, the thing we did that was most successful was get all the development tools moved from confusion about whether they should port OS/2 or Windows to supporting just Microsoft's Windows operating systems, because the development tools are the source of all the apps. And without the apps, an operating system starves. Right. So, my goal was to move the source of food away from OS/2, and I did that. I had all the app vendors, or all the tool vendors where I wanted them in 18 months.
It's a big deal.
Yes, that was
That's
a
trivial.
successful operation.
You talked about Craig a little bit. I know that there was a book written called Renegades of the Empire that talked about your escapades with Craig and somebody else named Alex St. John. How
Yes.
did you meet both of them, and what were your initial impressions of them?
So when I met Craig, he was at Whatcom in Canada. He is, without a doubt, the smartest developer I've ever met, and very close to the smartest human. It just depends on which day you catch him, whether he's the smartest human or just the most irritable. Alex joined later. So Craig at one point came to me and said, "I want your job." And I had actually went down to recruit him at that time, so that was an easy conversation. So I gave him my job and then immediately left to go hide in a stupid place for 18 months at Microsoft. I met Alex through Craig, even though he was also an evangelist, and he was in the halls as I was leaving. Turned out Craig and Alex were weightlifting together, and I was weightlifting with Craig, so the three of us ended up connected that way.
Okay. Let's talk about that other job move. You moved into the interactive TV group.
Yes.
Why were you hiding over there?
Well, I thought that would be a great place to go learn yet another skill. So evangelism is kind of a half step from development to marketing. I went and got a full product marketing job. I hated it.
Why?
Well, because there was no. If you don't have a development team that's actually doing anything, there's no way to get anything done as a product marketer. You can't go write code. You can't force anything to happen. Right? You may only determine what the market wants. And of course, the difficult thing about interactive television in 1994 was there was no market. So it was all just pie in the sky. Trying to invent the internet will end up being a decade early from a broadband standpoint, right? Next year, you'll start to see a lot of broadband applications.
So almost too theoretical, in a way. It was too theoretical for you. And
the theory doesn't bother me. It's that there's no practice attached to it.
Ever.
Yeah, I could never be a theoretical physicist because I could never actually make anything happen. You know, I don't mind dreaming something up. I just like to see it real.
So you stayed there for about a year and a half. How did your next move come about, and where did you go?
Alex and Craig came over to get me and said, look, we have this opportunity to build a game SDK. Games are huge.
SDK is?
A software development kit, sorry. We have this opportunity to go after the game industry. Games are huge. I don't like games, so I had no idea games were huge, and frankly still don't like games all that much. So anyway, I thought, well, I don't know. I think I'm going to quit Microsoft. And they said, no, you come over and do this. You're perfect as a program manager. So my job would be to spec the product and all that. So I interviewed for the job. Craig helped me get the job because the people in the group were convinced I wasn't technical enough for the job. Ended up getting the job and ended up speccing what became known as Directx in the process by literally reading every book I could on games and turning it into a specification that we could build and ship.
Yeah. What is the role of a program manager? You talked about defining the spec, but it goes pretty well beyond that.
Yeah, so for me, I think the role of a program manager is pretty much like the role of a CEO, frankly. There's
a smaller scale.
Yeah, there's directional, you know, what are we doing? What exactly are we doing? You know, and then there's an energy input that comes from the program manager, right? I can do this. You know, I am strong enough to last this many hours, so you must follow my example, right? And the third thing is, for want of a better word, I've always used the word putty. Right? When in any organization there are cracks that fit between the jobs of people, and people leave things on the table because either not their responsibility or you just can't afford a human to do that. And so to me, the job of the chief program manager or the CEO is to fill all those in to make a solid surface on which you can all stand.
And you're the one who owns who defines the schedule and owns the schedule as well.
Yeah, defines the product, defines the schedule, and makes sure everybody's marching to that drum.
One of the things that I think is really difficult about being a program manager is that you have all of the responsibility and none of the authority, in a sense, because usually the people that you're depending on are not reporting to you.
That turned out to never, I mean, that's actually accurate. Program managers have only other program managers working for them.
Right.
And the product is actually built and tested by development and test, and then marketed by marketing. And the program manager is imagine the center of a wheel that has those spokes sticking out of it. It's a central communication path. So one of the things you learn there is if you control all the communication between all the pieces, you have plenty of power. And the other thing is program managers have to rely on basically argumentative persuasion. So that's a polite term for just simply making people feel stupid if they don't do what you say. If you do this, go down this path, and it fails, here's the ramifications to the product. If you do it the way I say, here are the ramifications of failure or success. And again, one of the other pieces of a program manager is to be separate enough from the actual doing so that you can be more objective about what the downside risks are to doing something. Developers are great for saying, the last 3 times I've done something, it's taken me 10 days. This time I know I'm smarter, it's only going to take 5. And most humans are like that about everything, right? It cost me $10,000 before, it'll only cost 2 this time because I'm going to be better. And a program manager's job is to say, I understand that, and we'll obviously put 2 days down for you. And then just to put down 10 anyway. Right? And that makes everybody happy and everybody stress-free, and it's amazing what accountability does for people.
Now, was the Directx project supported by management, or was this sort of a little rogue project?
The game SDK was officially supported by management in that they gave myself and Alex and Craig each a job to do it. What we actually did was not supported by management. We used the game SDK shield and the size of the market and Alex and Craig and I's aggressive nature to make the project what we wanted it to be, which was what it ended up being, Directx 1, which was an extension to Windows rather than some hack to make it work better for a short period of time.
Why was being blunt a way to establish dominance?
It turns out most people aren't prepared for blunt, right? In all of your social interactions, if you don't like the way somebody dresses, you don't like the way your girlfriend dresses, you always find a long path to say, boy, you look better in this dress than you do in that dress, rather than saying you just look fat and ugly in that dress, right? It turns out that you don't want to ever follow that advice with your girlfriend, but it is
really well.
it is remarkably disarming to
Yeah.
to humans in a business setting because they just haven't heard it before. So then the other thing we would do is a lot of demonstrations of reality. So at one point, Brad Silverberg came down to fire us because we'd been blunt with him.
Not a good choice.
No, not a
necessarily.
good choice, and not a man who deserves bluntness either, right? I at the time had never met him, and I have a huge amount of respect for Brad Silverberg, and that was a mistake. And his acceptance of the fact that we'd made a mistake when he actually saw it working is a tribute to what a great leader he actually is. He comes down furious, and while he is explaining why there's no room at Microsoft for people like us, how's this work? Craig turns his monitor around, which now Craig picks up his monitor while he's seated, so you understand Craig's very strong. So he picks up this 20-inch monitor and turns it around. Brad
makes an impact.
Brad stops talking because he thinks Craig might be going to throw it at him, right? Because he's like Bam Bam in Flintstones, right? He's hugely strong. And Craig's not violent at all like that, but it is disconcerting to see somebody off balance pick up a very heavy thing and set it so you can see better. And then Craig makes Directx run this program we had called Bubsy, which would motion blur on its own on a 486, which is a very slow computer. Motion blurring is the effect they do now to make things look like they're moving really fast.
Right.
Turns out usually that's done with extra processing, and this was just done by making it go fast enough. No one had ever seen anything like that on a PC at the time, let alone on Windows, which was perceived as slow. So that was...
So that's how you turn Brad around.
Yes, then we switched from a conversation about why there was no room for us to a conversation about how we should get along with other people. And here is a list of things you need to work on as human beings to succeed here. So it was, it was the best demo I ever saw given. It turns out a demo worth a few $1 million. So,
What did you like and dislike about the project?
I liked everything about DirectX 1, mostly because I wasn't the customer. It's very easy for me to build something that I don't like, I don't want, because then it's just a technical problem. It's like a puzzle, and I have infinite passion for solving puzzles. But if I want the thing I'm building, then I have a patience problem getting it, and that tends to lead to less than optimal results. So, for me, for a company, I only build things I don't like, I'm not the customer for.
Well, that's an interesting philosophy.
In fact, at my company, whenever I argue about this feature or that feature, what I always get is remember your T-shirt, Eric. Eric, you are not the customer. So, and that actually is a great philosophy in building a business, is don't get confused about what you want. Don't get mad at people for telling you that's not a feature they like. It's a very puzzling feature about most humans is you show them something, they do some work, you get some feedback from them, they go, well, but I like it this way. And you go, do you wish to be embarrassed in front of 5 people or 50 million? Your choice. And most people will choose the 50 million because it's anonymous somehow. I don't understand that either,
but there it is.
Yes, there it is.
So was the Directx project successful?
Phenomenally so, actually. Actually, we had enormous dreams of its success, and it exceeded all of them. Our intention was to build enough credibility in the game industry that the 3 of us could go off and build a game company. Again, Alex and Craig loved games. It fit all my models for being successful because I didn't care. It turned out that it was nearly an overnight success, fastest adopted API in Microsoft's entire history, which it has had some considerable
Wins.
successes. Yeah, we went from 4% share to 92 or 96% share. I actually forget which part of the 90s we were in 18 months, which is unheard of.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible. And the industry moves fast, but not usually that
No,
fast
it was,
in that way.
and it was very cool to see hardware companies that had run out of things to do all of a sudden spring up and get funded because they could support the API. And likewise with game companies. I mean, I have this story I like to tell about the adoption of DirectX, which to me is, I learned a big lesson from it because it turns out when you build something new, people talk about crossing the chasm and all of this stuff and the slow grind, and that works for a lot of things. But in general, if you have a very little bit of money, you need to look for something that you can do to a crowd what happens to you when you have a great idea, right? The whole crowd just goes, got it. No more explanation required. The 30-second experience, right? Because you can always get 30 seconds with anybody. The company we have now, Wildseed, also has a 30-second experience, right? People go, I don't understand what you do. All I need is 30 seconds and they get it. They may not like it, but they're not confused about what it is.
Right.
DirectX 1, we walked into a crowd of 1,200 DOS game developers who hated Microsoft. They are this is an amphitheater, right? So it feels like you're in the Coliseum, and there are 1,200 people stamping their feet going DOS, 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 DOS. And so I'm looking up, we made these white lab coats, you know, with the Manhattan Project on it, which is another, we thought it was a very funny code name, right? Because we're going after the Japanese game companies. So just maximizing the 50th anniversary of the bomb, you know what? It's humor, right? It's funny. It's only funny if you have a certain twisted way of looking at the world. We discovered later.
Press doesn't.
Ironically, the Japanese loved it. They thought it was hysterical too. But and the U.S. press liked it. Microsoft was the people that had a problem with it. But anyway, so we got we called our party Ground Zero for this launch, and I'm standing out there in my white lab coat with the glowing stuff on the back, and I'm thinking, boy, this is going to be fun, isn't it? I felt like a human in Planet of the Apes, right? DOS, 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 DOS. They're stamping it. Craig runs the same demo. Same exact demo actually ran for Brad. You could have heard a pin drop. So from all that noise to first question asked, guy raises his hand and says, "How do I do that?" And it was done.
That what you were in.
Yeah, there was no. The next day we had a question and answer session, and what you would hear from the developers as you were walking by is, well, you just got to support this. Right? It's so clearly the only way to do things. And, you know, we solve all these problems and all those problems, and, you know, I can't believe they did it. And that's when you know you don't necessarily have the right product. People get confused with adding extra features, but you have struck a pressure point of built up. There's a lot of energy that is willing to be spent on conversion at that point because a lot of people are frustrated by whatever the problem is. Right. And that helps a bunch. So
the Directx experience was sort of a wild and wonderful ride, but now it was time to do something new. How did the Browser on Steroids project come your way?
A very large reorganization inside Microsoft, basically due to this thing called the Internet, where Windows became less and less interesting to Microsoft because there was this huge threat that Netscape was going to move all the apps to the browser, you know, disintermediate Windows from the thing that customers cared about. In fact, Mark Andreessen, I believe is his name, even said that, right? Windows is just a poorly debugged device driver, don't worry about it. So in that group, I ended up in the Internet division because that was the group where they put everybody who was good at new things. And they put all the people who were stable, great stable pyramid builders. They left those guys in Windows, please make Windows better. And you crazy people, you need to come over here and help us fight Netscape. And the idea was we could build a browser that would be so much better on Windows because of DirectX that you could get basically television-style graphics. You know, you watch Monday Night Football and the things flip away. The idea was to be able to do that on the Internet with video, a few XML tags. And they're finally the next version of Windows is supposed to have a lot of those concepts finally in it.
So at this point, you were also kind of ready to try your hand more at management. How did you like it?
I like the responsibility of management, and I like the complexities that it entails. I don't particularly like the HR component. You know, what I found out, and what is still true for me, is that, you know, 30% of my time is just being dad, right? Your nose is running, you know, I'm sorry Herman hit you, you know, and Herman didn't mean it. I know he said you were fat, but he was really looking at somebody behind you. He wasn't talking to you. It's okay. Please go back and do your job. We all die if you don't do your job. And here's some chocolates for you. And, you know, that's fine. It's not necessarily the management that they teach you, but human beings constantly want to be reaffirmed. And just frankly, I mean, this is true for everybody involved in any startup company except the CEO. Right? Everybody wants to know that you, as the captain, are still completely convinced it's going to work. And most of that has to be delivered in person. You know, the investors want to make sure you're still comfortable, the employees, everybody. And that's not unreasonable, right? Because you're the center of the wheel, which is exactly the same way in a program management structure. Right. So.
You spent a lot of time promoting this project, which is called Chrome. What eventually happened to the Chrome project?
So we finished Chrome Effects, got it done, and the problem we had at Microsoft at the time was it was being hailed by the press as, you know, the best innovation Microsoft has done in the last 5 years.
Which should be a good thing.
Yes, but it was attached to the Internet. People were saying, you know, this is the most innovative thing since DirectX. This is this is that. You know, I don't generally like Microsoft products, but I love Chrome Effects, blah, blah, blah. The fly in the ointment was the perpetual line, this is a Netscape killer. And it was tied to Windows, you know, intimately by the technology focus in Directx. It was strictly non-portable, right? It was never designed in the slightest to run anything other than Windows, just like Directx was, right? It was a extension of Windows in the truest sense. In my opinion, it would have made the Department of Justice case easier to explain because you just can't do that cross-platform. Right. Sun doesn't have a feature like that on their operating system. OS2 doesn't have a DirectX, so it would have made the it's part of the operating system feature more explicit. But because we were labeled a Netscape killer, it was not. Right. No one wanted to help me fight that battle, so Chrome Effects got put to one side.
And then as part of this Chrome project, you had a meeting with Apple, and I think that was in 1997. What was the purpose of the meeting, and what was the perceived purpose of the meeting?
The purpose of the meeting evidently seemed to embroil me in a lawsuit. The perceived purpose of the meeting was to make the codecs common, which is to make the way that video and audio is compressed on your PC, the format, if you will, VHS, Beta, etc., common between Windows and Apple Macintosh. The idea behind this, I don't know if this is an experience any of your customers have had, or any of your viewers, when you go to a website and you download a video, if it's a QuickTime video, sometimes it won't be able to play in the Windows Media Player. That's because of this issue. And I thought it was an unreasonable customer experience, right? You make the TV good, right? You make great picture, you make a good remote control, but you don't have to buy a Sony television to watch your show. Right? You can buy any television to watch your show, and that was the point of my defense, and that was the point of my mission down to Apple. And unfortunately, the Apple guys decided that was an antitrust violation. Yes. The customer is not important in this scenario.
So you ended up being one of the 12 people asked to testify for Microsoft. It would be silly to ask you whether or not you were nervous the night before the trial. So the obvious question is, how nervous were you the night before the trial? I
have been gifted with very little nervous problems in my entire life, and I was literally throwing up. Imagine every person I'd seen before, the people testified in Microsoft's behalf from Microsoft. I knew them all. They were brilliant people, right? And they had just got destroyed. And I thought, boy,
this is going to be really bad.
This is not going to be any fun at all, right? I'm going to get up there, and they are just going to kick the crap out of me, right? And the guy that was on right before me, literally, I went on in the middle of the day. He's probably literally the nicest human that ever worked at Microsoft, and one of the smartest. And it's a very bad combination for an aggressive trial room, because he would just stare like a poor little puppy in the headlights while Boyce just beat him senseless again and again and again. And I thought, boy, there should be, can't you call timeout or, unnecessary roughness? I mean, I don't pay much attention to sports, but there's got to be some gesture, right? Stop that.
Stop.
Let me answer the questions for him. So anyway, I went up. In the context of entering my first day at the stand, it was watching him literally just unable to answer questions. Boyce had hit him so hard. I thought, this is going to be even worse than I imagined. Yes. Yeah. Can I go throw up again before I take the stand? So.
I don't think I was done yet. So how did your testimony end up differing from others?
Well, the evangelism training really worked out well for me, because there was I'm always given to flippant responses when I think that it's a stupid question. And the guy just caught me completely off guard, and I just responded natively to him. He said, the question was, why did you think you had to control this particular thing all the way down to the componentry, the chips on the computer? I said, because I'm full of myself. And at that single outburst, I was just, what a dumb question, right? Of course I'm arrogant, okay? Done with that. The crowd laughed. The judge laughed. In fact, the judge, Penfield Jackson's a great drinker of water. He would literally go through a pitcher every hour. So we took breaks every hour. Anyway, he literally spit the water over his bench. And at that instant, that was like question 3, I thought, oh, I know this place.
How to do this.
You are just a crowd of people, and that lawyer is just a nagging customer who doesn't quite understand how the technology works. And that was the end of that. Everything else was easy. And
Did you have any favorite moments? I know you were telling me a story about, I wish I could remember the word, but a word that they had asked you to define, or...
Oh, yes, to give you an idea of how persistent this individual is. And I guess they should. I think this is a class they should teach in school. This is how an attorney attacks email, because you would think twice before you ever wrote anything down. It would bring the we wouldn't have to worry about recycling to protect trees. No one would ever write anything down. The word I'd used was I wish to stop this particular company, Intel in the case, from doing this activity that Microsoft didn't like, which had to do with controlling part of the stack that would allow us not to evolve the product forward the way we wanted. The point that the lawyer kept sticking on is, didn't you mean to prevent? And I said, no, I meant stop. That's what I put, is stop, and that's what I meant, is stop. And he said, but didn't you really mean to prevent? The third time he asked me this question, and lawyers have to ask the question differently each time, because the judge will tell them they're badgering the witness, etc. So he comes at it a different angle each time. And finally, I said, let me give you an example. The word means stop. I can ask you to stop asking me this question, but I cannot prevent you from restating it. The judge laughs, the crowd laughs. The judge, after he's done with his glass of water, says, I assume we'll be moving on now, right? And that was the tenor of the stand. The other really cool thing about the way the testimony went, they were very nice to me there. I got taken out for dinner by the guy that's running Microsoft's defense, which from the outside looks like they did a terrible job, but they really are literally the best law firm in the U.S. The head of litigation for Sullivan and Cromwell tells me I'm in the top 5 witnesses he's ever had, which I thought was a huge compliment for a guy in plaid shirts. And
you didn't wear your plaid shirt.
No, I did not for this. No, I bought a new suit and dressed in my new definition of spiffy. But the other thing he said is we didn't have to do any recross on you, which it turns out that's recross is a term that lawyers use to say now we're mopping up the mistakes you made when you were talking. So it's like editing for film crews. Right. So anyway, that was that.
So when you left Microsoft, you were pretty ready to leave? You were done?
Yes, I was. The problem that I had with Microsoft is they had gotten so big that for their own health, right, and this is not a complaint. I mean, I love the company, but as a reasonable management strategy, they had to solidify their ranks. They needed less renegades. You know, they just could not afford people like me disturbing the boundaries of product lines, because, you know, if I set off a bomb in the wrong spot, they might lose $1 billion revenue pump. I understand that completely. It's just not exciting to me, right? In the sense that I want to go do something new, and new is generally best done small. So
tell us about catalytic.com.
So 3 days after my last day at Microsoft, I was on a plane to India, because I had always wanted to build a business in India. Didn't really care what the business was. I think there's a couple of interesting facets about India. One, they have a huge educated population. It's English speaking, which is great for me because I barely speak that language. And they're very friendly to Americans, even though the governments have a hard time getting along. The Indian people and the American people, I mean, I worked with tons of Indians at Microsoft. We have no cultural barriers. They're very friendly. There's no worry about getting shot or kidnapped or any things you usually associate with less than European countries. They also use British law, so it's very easy to set up a business and know you're going to get to keep it and all of those things, which are important. And the other thing is they're 9 degrees from the equator, and they have Russian rockets, so it's ideal if a person ever wanted to, had enough money and wanted to engage in lunacy, it would be the best place to launch a rocket for Mars or other parts unknown. So that was the with visions like that, off I went.
It doesn't go away, does it?
Yeah, after my shots and everything, away I went. So.
And what did you decide to do there?
We decided to build a software outsourcing company because that's, of course, what I know the best. And looked like the market was going, still does, by the way, looks like the market is going to explode for outsourcing, especially if you can make the program management part of it work. Because what they have is a bunch of developers, and people in the United States want a good deal. And the problem is managing the developers to get the result that the customer's expecting turns out to be really hard skill to teach in schools. So and then there's the cultural issues of what means you're doing a good job and what you're managing. And so what we found is, our theory was, if we put a American cultural face on the Indian development engine, we'd have a product that would really sing. And there's another company similar to Catalytic called Congruent at the moment, which is, they merged things together. They had a bunch of money to start with, and they're doing really well with that similar model now. So we've signed some amazing deals for Catalytic, so we're really happy.
Cool. And how did the idea for Wildseed come about?
Well, that was actually the Ignition idea. My my first investors in Wildseed, was a VC called Ignition. John Ludwig is there, Brad Silverberg is there, a bunch of the usual suspects from Microsoft had left about the same time I did. And Ludwig called me up in January and said, look, we would like you to do something. And we think this teen movement in Japan is going to be really big, and there's a huge opportunity there, and you do fun game things, right? So I think it fits with you, right? You've never been a teenager. So building something for teenagers ought to fit in your category if you're not the customer. So what do you think?
There you go.
And that's how we got started. So.
Is it any coincidence that both you and Alex St. John have companies that have wild in the title?
Well, yeah, maybe. The reason that I have the Wildseed name is because I have owned the URL for a long time. I like a particular book that is by that name. And I always thought it was a great name for a biotech company or something. The original name for the company we founded was GetWit, as in get in touch with it. It was our attempt to be hip. It didn't work out so well for us, especially when we go to Europe and the secretary would just, really? Because it turns out that GetWit is 2 insults in 1 word in Britain. And get is like some moron.
Right.
And it's anyway, so it just
Didn't
it wasn't
travel
working.
well.
No, it did get us a lot of attention because no one would believe you'd call a company that. So as a launch name, it was perfect. And then we hired an agency to name the company, and they just came back with nothing that worked. And I got tired of paying money for schlock. So well, I own this URL and I own these trademarks. Why don't we
just use it?
Let's just use it. And so that's how it came about. Wild Tangent is more of a life statement for Alex.
It is. And what is the company doing? What do they do?
So we actually don't make phones, even though we'll always show you a phone when we show you our stuff. We build the software for the phone, and the software that runs on these little chips, which are called smart skins. So the idea is you take the phone, and when you put the faceplate on it, which we call an intelligent accessory, because the phone will actually work without the sleeve on, because we don't want to make some security problem where if you break your skin or whatever, you can't make a phone call. And what this does, this is an MTV skin. So the chip in the accessory of the faceplate moves the personality of the skin over to the phone. So what ends up happening is if you have a music phone, for example, a Madonna phone, a Madonna skin, when you put it on, the phone feels like a Madonna phone, like it came from the factory, tuned for Madonna. A Matrix skin would make the phone feel like it came from the factory as a Matrix product. So the nice thing about that is, first off, young people tend to change their faceplates to match their outfits. The girls do. The boys tend to, they want a game, for example, with game controls when they're by themselves, and no one wants your girlfriend to think you play a lot of games. So the issue there is you take this off and you no longer have a silly game phone.
Right.
You have a
Regular.
cool phone or an M&M phone or what have you, and that's the whole premise of the business.
So in terms of running your own company, what was hard that you thought would be easy, and what was easy that you thought would be hard?
Amazingly, getting the product actually finished in an environment that is built from scratch has turned out to be way harder than I thought. I mean, we're doing that just fine, and it's just amusing to me that it was any stretch at all, right? Because that's what I've done all my life, and engineering's always been simple. But that was much harder than I thought it would be, probably because in this particular case we had to do the mechanical thing as well, just to get a prototype out, and we'd never done that before at all. So 2/3 of what we did on the first version was first time we'd ever done it, managing a bunch of vendors for processes and technology we didn't really understand, and so that was very painful. And what was easier, it turns out, is the sales and marketing. I expected that to be very difficult, and we ended up with a great VP of sales and a great VP of marketing, and they've made that problem just go away. Cool. It's amazing to me the amount of coverage we get when we go to a show. People will stop me and go, "You're the CEO of Wildseed," rather than "You're the renegade of the empire," right. Or whatever, right? Wildseed has become the thing that they identify everybody that works there with, rather than our past, and that's very cool.
Yeah, it is
especially
cool.
with a past as colorful as mine.
Yes.
Getting a clean slate at 35 is a great deal.
It is a good deal, isn't it? What are your long-term hopes for the company?
I would like to see the technology pervasive among phones. I think that's the way I look at everything as a success, right? As if you see people using your software, your product, clothes you design, whatever it is, right, in a mass market environment, that's the jazz. That's the satisfying thing. When I was in Two anecdotes about Directx. I'm in New York, in Las Vegas. I'm walking across the thing to go play some blackjack with Alex, and I have a Directx T-shirt on. The shoeshine boy, yes, absolutely, the shoeshine boy. Though he wasn't a boy, but the shoeshine man comes running across the thing. Goes, excuse me, you stop. So did I lose something?
Yeah.
And some guy's running at me, and I think, oh, I'm with Alex. We're both big. It'll be fine. He goes, do you know anything about that? And I said, yes, I might know a little about it. What can I do for you? And he goes, rattles off his driver version number, the card he's got. He says, and you got to know something to help me because, and I said, I know a lot about it. You need to go get this patch, put it on there, and the game will run fine. And he goes, so how do you know all that? And I said, I built it. You would have thought the guy had an emotional moment, right? I mean, he's touching me. I don't like to be touched, and it's okay. I've already been paid for it. Stop touching me. It's just fine. When you get moments like that, or when you see people using this stuff, we ended up in the funnies with Directx once. It was this little cartoon that, the kid wants what he wants for Christmas is Riven. It's a game, and it says the next thing is it requires new Directx drivers. And the dad, it was actually derogatory, but it was still funny. The dad's buying a new PC, and he goes, exactly what I wanted, a new PC. And the whole point was you
don't have to get
you can't upgrade Directx, but every game requires it. So you just have to buy a new computer all the time. And that was fun. They were poking fun at us, but it's mainstream to be in the comics. When you
get there.
When you're a social problem, that's popularity of a sort. Anyway. So.
We'll take questions from the audience right after this.
The University of Washington Business School, located in Seattle, Washington, ranks among the top business schools in the United States. Information Technology Leaders is one of the many ways the UW Business School forges partnerships and reaches out beyond the university. For more information about the University of Washington Business School or Information Technology Leaders, visit informationtechnologyleaders.com.
Okay, hi. I'm a business student too, and in this new kind of company you are making now with these cell phones, what do you expect will be the growth of the company? What do you expect will be, or what kind of segments are you targeting now in order to grow and expand your product and make it available to more people, not just nationally, but out of the U.S. too?
Super question. The idea, again, in any small business where you don't have infinite resources is you pick the point where adoption will be the simplest. So the reason our phone is, well, there's two reasons our phone is focused on the youth market, but one of them is because that's what the investors wanted me to do first. But aside that for a moment, if you have investors who want you to do something, it's a good idea to go after that. But assuming that you had this idea of what we have, these intelligent faceplates, on their own, you would pick the youth segment for it anyway, because that's the place that people already buy faceplates today for their phones. And so your entire distribution channel, everything about that is already, everyone understands it. The entire channel understands it. So we're just putting a chip inside it. Who knows? Who cares if they understand, frankly, right? They understand it's a faceplate and it's a phone. So you don't have to teach the world anything. You just made something better. Once you get that working on the revenue from that, then you look for other places where that can broaden the appeal of your product. So like, for example, we're using the smart skin idea, putting a picture on it that happens to be your picture, for example, in the company you work on. So now your phone, it's a security thing. It's got nothing about fashion or that you like M&M. Taking the same technology and reapply it to security, which is a big deal, right? Especially now post 9/11, especially with the wireless data networks happening, because now they're broadcasting your corporate data over the air. So anybody with a van, you no longer have physical security in your company. Everything's over the air. So the fact that they can reach out and turn your computer off, if you will, or your phone, with a message is hugely interesting to corporations. And the fact that your phone has your picture on it, so everyone can tell it's your phone inside the corporation because your computer now is identified with you physically, has huge merit as well. If we tried to build a company today to go after the corporate security model, even though our projections and all of our customer research shows there's more money there, we'd never get funded because they ask you questions like, how do you teach the customer to do this new behavior? Right? How do you fund the technology while you're getting adoption? All these mountains that if you're Microsoft, you just go, whatever, we've got an infinite amount of money. If you're a small company, you go someplace you don't have to teach anybody anything except, hey, this is just a better faceplate. And from that money, then you broaden out into other markets. Obviously, the other thing we're doing is teenagers are remarkably similar in behavior, not necessarily content, but the behavior is very similar in Europe, Asia, and the United States. So the only thing we have to change on our phone is the shape of it and the air interface, and those are pretty easy things to change. So we're doing that first and then going into vertical markets.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to close with a quote from several of the people that Eric worked with. Eric is absolutely fearless. He is infinitely creative, always thinking outside the box. He has ruthless focus, immense drive, and turn-it-upside-down genius. In terms of management style, he's hands-off if you're doing your job, and hands-elbow stuff deep into your gut if you're not. His best quote is, "I'd better not be better at your job than you are." He inspires either phenomenal loyalty or phenomenal fear, and he uses both well. Looking towards the future, whatever Eric tries, it will be something big and outrageous. The only real certainty is that he will be better and wiser than he is today. That is a fundamental Eric characteristic. I expect he will be rich, but he could also be broke. Either will make him better.